Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and these amazing patrons.
Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patrons Brody Harris and Lance Albertson.
Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video. Hey there everybody, DMO73 here, bringing you a feature match for the week as we prep for GP Denver this weekend. I am playing inspired by kind of Josh Patton, who played a while ago on the channel, one of the patrons. I wanted to try out Kaguya-4. I realized I have never actually used Kaguya-4 myself at all on the channel. It's always been my opponent. So I decided to play K4 exclusively with the intention of trying to win by doing the alternative win con with the 12 kimonos. And I'm playing against Pete again, who is playing his Mars burn list. So huge thanks to him for being willing to sit down and deal with the dirtily defensive control style alternate win con kimono deck that I'm going to be playing. It's pure blue-green, there's no white in the list. So we'll have to see how this goes. I'm going to be on the draw. Another thing to note that could potentially go not really in my favor is the fact that I am only playing Millennia Bonds. I am not playing any Fairer spells or Severing Winds, at least in the main. We are going to be sideboarding for this game because Pete had something he kind of wanted to try out. But ultimately, in the main board of this deck, I decided not to bring in any Severing Winds or Fairer spell. So we'll have to see how it goes against a burn list. I could potentially just not have enough cancel spells to deal with it, but the beauty of K4 is it has a lot of draw power, and then the other beauty is Millennia Bond is typically going to get me both modes, which helps me get towards that alternative win con. So getting things started with Mars and his two mana counters. And we are off to get started. Calling that first stone, hitting a Heat Ray. Choosing to go ahead and cast Memory to Memoria, which deals 5 damage to a player. It's either 5 or 4, I might be wrong. I believe it's 5. Me hitting a Deepwood on my first turn, and then using Kaguya's effect to reveal the top card. It is a treasury, so I get to draw it, getting one of those kimonos. See, I already have 2, so that's 2 down and 10 to go. At the end of the turn, he's going to use that one of his mana counters to play Heartfelt Fire, which will ramp him up to 4 mana counters. So one of the reasons why we haven't seen Mercurius and Mars played almost at all recently is just because of the fact that Last Days of the Powerless Dragonoid removes mana counters. So not really that great. So a lot of sideboard decks, could potentially, if Mars or Mercurius get very popular, could easily just start sideboarding that card, at which point those rulers are pretty much null and void. I'm going to go ahead and get another Deepwood here and try to reveal, seeing a Millennia Bond. I'll go ahead and start playing play a Drifting Little Moon, who is probably, in my opinion, probably one of the best support cards for K4 to come out in a very long time. The fact that it's a creature, can ping stuff for damage, and is a treasury, I think is great. So I'll just play that and then pass the turn. Pete, during the upkeep, is going to try to gain some more counters. And I say that's totally fine. You can go up to 7. Goes to recover. Calls the Stone, hits the Scorched Bales. Pays 3 to cast Eruption, and so he's using this to try to kill my Drifting Little Moon. I'm going to go ahead and Millennia Bond that. I want to keep Drifting Little Moon on the field as long as possible because it is a treasury, so I do get to just draw a card off of it too, and then the card that I draw for turn is actually another Millennia Bond, so feeling pretty comfortable about being able to potentially cancel the next spell. Hitting Kaguya's Stone of Sorrow, which will let me look at the top 2 cards of my deck, probably to put a treasury on top of it. Play a Kimono. And then decide to pass. I think at that point in time, actually, I didn't see a treasury at all in either one of the cards, so I put the card that I wanted to put on top and then didn't reveal it with Kaguya because I didn't want to show it to Pete. Calls for a stone, hits a Heat Ray. I apologize for the shaky camera. Some people were kind of hitting the camera as they were walking past, so we're working on improving that for future vids. So I think at this point in time I have like 3 or 4 other kimonos in my hand, which is great. It's a strong start. Calling for another stone, hitting the Can't remember what that card is called. It's blue, but then you can tap to produce green as the countdown stone from Vingolf. So I'm going to play 2 to play the tree from Echoes of the New Worlds. That it's a 2-drop 2/8 that can't attack, and whenever it blocks, you draw a card. Ultimately, this isn't going to do a ton against Pete's list, purely because he's not really attacking a lot. But it was the whole idea was decide to put it up really early, and then you use like Drifting Little Moons to like ping stuff for damage, so that if they even want to try to attack, you can block with this tree and just continually draw cards. So he's going to attempt to flash in the Welser here, knowing that that indicates to me that because he's using the God Art now, he's probably going to try to land a big spell. So am I better off trying to stop the Welser or pop the Welser in response to something or something like that? Or am I better yet to just kind of let him resolve? I go ahead and let the Welser go through. My reasoning thought here is if he's going to play a big burn spell, I have the Millennium Bond in hand, so I can kind of mitigate the Welser, at which point he's wasted the Welser, because I don't plan to attack. So it'll go away at the end of my turn, and it won't really get the chance to do anything. It's going to go ahead and call Stone here, hits another Scorched Bales. Pays 3, 4, and 2 counter, and all of his counters to try to do Ancient Impact for 11. I'm going to go ahead and use Millennia Bond to cancel the Ancient Impact, and because the Welser's effect hasn't resolved yet, Welser won't actually get to copy it. So that's kind of how this effect works. Like I explained before, if you use Millennia Bond, the cancel spell on the chant that Welser is trying to copy before Welser's effect resolves, then Welser doesn't actually copy anything. But if you let Welser's effect resolve, then you actually have to cancel both spells. So I'm going to use the Millennia Bond here to stop it. And the thing is, I have a blue and a green, so now I get a free treasury. Boom, in comes to play the Robe. So it's 2 Millennia Bonds down. I only have 2 more to go. The Welser is irrelevant because I'm not going to be swinging in, and at the end of my turn, it's going to get RFG'd. So you see I have two more of the Millennia Bonds in my hand, so I'm feeling pretty comfortable at this point. I'm going to pay 3 to play Shayla's Adventure. You saw this played by Sigma Patton. It's really great. You get to draw 2, put an addition that costs 2 or less into the field, which counts as a treasury, at which point in time I can say use Kaguya's effect to do a judgment for 2. And in response, I'm going to look at the top card. It's not a treasury, so I don't get to draw it, but it's a Scarlet's Agony. Because I put an addition into play this turn, out comes the wonderful Kaguya 4. So now at this point I get to make use of lots of different effects. He starts to put the Welser back in his hand, but then I correct him. I say, no, it gets removed from the game. It doesn't go back to your hand when you RFG, when it gets at the end of my turn. So at this point in time, even though I have 1 will available, I've got 5 treasuries, which is great because Kaguya can let me produce extra will. I'm 1 treasury short of being able to cast 2 Millennia Bonds off of this will base, but at the same time, I could potentially cast Millennia Bond and draw a card, which is kind of what I want this deck to be doing. I want it to be massively stockpiling these treasuries so that every turn I'm just going to start digging and digging and digging, even if he doesn't swing in with his creatures. So he's going to try to play the Spirit of Fire, so all of his fire chants will do 200 extra damage. Starts to cast a Crimson Ray, and I say, you know what, that's fine. I will take the 8 damage. You can gain the 6 life. So I go down to 27. I'm going to draw for turn, and then use my 3 Kimonos to draw another card. Calling for Stone with Kaguya at this point. Once she's flipped, I mean, because I have the barrier, right? And because she's not a creature, I really don't have to be terribly concerned. She can't even die to Final Battle. There's very few things in this game that can actually kill Kaguya, at least at this point, now that she's flipped. because she doesn't have a stat line. She just exists on the board, and she has natural barrier, so there's no current way to actually kill her when she's flipped as long as I don't animate her, which is great, because now that I flipped her, she's pretty much turned on for the rest of the game. I can't be drawing cards by like revealing the top card, but every 3 treasuries that remains untapped at my beginning of my turn is just another card. And so I'm probably never really going to animate her, so at this point in time, there's no reason to not just keep calling stone with her every single turn. Once I get to 10 stones, though, I can just animate her at will and be a beefy blocker if I need to. So this is the moment where I kind of want to talk about the weirdness of K4 and the alternative win con. Pete's kind of rearranging his will over here. So they created this system where the kimonos, right? The more kimonos you have, the better each one gets. But the problem with that is the alternative win con is get all 12. But once you have all 12, like even at 11, you can just kill your opponent, which makes this kind of weird. So a lot of people play like 8 kimonos purely for the sake of like, once you have 8, it's pretty much lethal there anyway. You don't need to go for the full 12. But I tried to build this deck exclusively with the idea in mind of doing just that, of getting all 12 out there, because I want to stop it. He tries to cast the Memory to Memoria. I'm going to go ahead and draw a card and then get Millennium on, cast that. And then I get the first Moon, I think is what it's called. This is the one that all of my other editions can't be destroyed, and I can tap it, or when it gets tapped, I give minus 200 attack to something. During my upkeep, he's going to try to do a Burn to Cinders, not Burn to Cinders, I apologize. Blood Boil, which would deal 1,000 damage to me because of the 2 Spirits of Fire. I'm going to use my 4 of my treasuries to produce 2 will. I'm going to try to use 4 of them to bounce one of the spirits back to his hand. I only have to take 8 damage from it instead and then recover. So this is where kind of the, I guess, defensive dirtiness of this deck comes in. I'm going to land so many additions, so many treasuries, that it's just going to be very, very hard for him to even stick any form of damage against me. His burn is really his best bet, simply because of the fact that I'm going to run out of cancels. But at the same time, if he's going to try to play any kind of creature stuff, it's not really going to end well. And the fact that he's already used a lot of the cards from his hand keeps me at a pretty safe position. At Pete's situation here, it's really going to be a matter of, can he find these little sneaky ways to try to burn me out, or make me, or get cards back into his hand enough to kind of overwhelm me and stop all my cancels. So this is one of those situations too with like Glistening Chick, right? Where if I attach all those kimonos, each of those kimonos would be giving +6/+6. So Glistening Chick itself would be a 41/41 flyer. So just bam, there's 5 damage right there, or there's pretty much lethal right there. I take him down to 5. And that's one of the weird things of Kaguya, right? So, like, they created this alternative win con for her, but the natural effects of the kimonos make it so, like, you can just win the game even without using the alternative win con very easily. So I do have to thank Pete for being such a good sport and willing to indulge in this experiment on trying to deal all of this stuff. So I'm going to try to use, as he moves into combat, I'm going to attempt to use Kaguya Force Effect to tap down Glistening Chick to give -2 attack to the guy, the Spirit of Fire. Glistening Chick, however, by tapping, taps down the Spirit of Fire. So then during the upkeep, I can tap the Drifting Little Moon to ping it for 4 damage because it's trusted, recover, and then tap Drifting Little Moon to ping it for 4 damage again. With Drifting Little Moon, I think Glistening Chick became much better of a treasury item for Kaguya. Just provides a lot more utility, and it even serves as a better protector. So here's at the point where I'm going to start slamming down as many kimonos as I can. Just as soon as I find them, I'm probably going to slam them. And at this point, I could just attach all 7 of those to Glistening Chick and kill him. But again, that's not what we're going for in this match. We are trying to get to 12 kimonos and seeing just kind of how long it takes the deck to try to do that. After recovery, before recovery, he's going to play the white-red Pact. He's going to choose the burn damage effect. So he's going to get to draw a card, reveal a card, and then burn me for that much damage. So the question here becomes, do I waste a Millennium Bond on this? And I say no, but then he reveals a World Flame Summoning, so I take 6 damage. So I go down to 13. Really did not want to see that much burn damage come down, but at least I have the Millennium Bond to deal with the World Flame Summoning should he cast it. I really have to be very particular about which, I think I only have 1 Millennium Bond left, so I really have to be particular about which of my cancels, which of his big burn spells I potentially use it against. Pete's performing Judgment here. Flips over Mars. Does have the Namblot, so he gets to go up to 15 counters, or 10 counters, my apologies. He's going to play the Spirit of Fire. And then he's going to attempt to cast the World Flame Summoning using his counters. And at that point in time, knowing that his hand is empty, I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, this is the time I'm going to use that Millennium Bond. I'm going to cancel, I get to draw a card, and I drew into a Kimono, which then I get to put into play, because everything revolves in order, and I can put a treasury into field. So up to 8 Kimonos, only 4 more to go, and now I have a lot of card draw that's about to come my way. So you're going to see 1 card, 2 cards, 3 cards, and I'm going to tap down the Spirit of Fire while doing that, because of Glistening Trick's effect. So there is a tree that's a 3-drop treasury tree that draws a card when it enters. That's blue and green. I decided not to play that because I wanted to kind of keep the curve of the deck in terms of creatures pretty low to the ground. And also just kind of wanted to stick to the theme of like my stuff can't attack. So I'm going to go ahead and play a Drifting Little Moon here, as well as a Miracle Millennium Medicine and a 9th Kimono. So only have 3 more to go. I have plenty of stuff in my hand to deal with any potential attackers or anything else that he might throw my way. I'm really just worried about burn spells at this point. I'm going to use 3 to draw a card and give minus 200 attack to the Spirit of Fire. I'll spend 1 to use Separation of Body and Soul to kill the Spirit of Fire. And then spend 1 more to play another Miracle Millennium Medicine. So the Millennium Medicine here is pretty helpful in the fact that it's going to be the way that I kind of try to recycle my cancel spells, especially since I have so much draw power. The question is just becomes I have to kind of be dependent on Pete's top decks not being that much damage. He has so much will at this point that if he was to potentially draw another Ancient Impact, I could be in a pretty big trouble. So what I could have done here, actually, which I think probably would have been smart in response to the Kaguya's effect, the Kaguya's No Sorrow, is I could have cracked the Millennium Medicine to shuffle back in 3 of the 4 Millennium Bonds, shuffle the deck, and then let the Kaguya's resolve to see if I could maybe set up a Millennium Bond to be on top of the deck. Pete actually just passes draws a card and passes the turn. So after my draw phase for the turn, I'm actually going to get to draw a lot of cards. So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. Again, I could have used this situation to potentially just use the Millennium Medicines to cycle in, but I don't quite want to do that yet. Simply because I want to try to, at this point I'm kind of rushing him to see if I can get to my Kimonos fast enough. So I call for Stone, hit a Stone of Sorrow, look at the top 2, see my final Kimono in there, which is great. Then I'm going to use 3 of my treasuries here to draw a card. Play those 3 Kimonos. I start to pick them up to kind of organize them, and Pete flashes me that he might have a card here. So what I do, just to be safe, because I do have it in my hand, is I play the Night Moon Blossom, which has barrier. So I play these just because I just want a backup way to be able to safely attach all my kimonos to something effectively. So there is all 12 attached to a Night Moon Blossom, which gives me the alternative win con to win the game. And then we go on to game 2. So Pete puts me back on the draw here, and actually, as you can see, he's sideboarded into Kirik. Now, I talked to Pete about this, and his whole idea was he wanted to see how the deck ran with Kirik as opposed to Mars, so that he could see what burn looked like, at least with what we have now, after rotation. Like, how well does Kirik make use of burn? Could Kirik serve as a burn ruler after rotation? Starting with those 10 strength counters, going to my turn, getting a deep wood, and then seeing a Millennium Medicine or a Millennium on off the top, so I don't get to draw it, but I do get the turn 1 Drifting Little Moon. So at this point in time, I've sideboarded into a little bit heavier control package, knowing that it's burn. I took out the trees, and I put in Fairer Spells, a Severing Winds, and a couple of Jupiters, just so I could eventually get to a point. He's going to try to use Callous Blaze here, to burn off the Drifting Little Moon. I say that's fine. Any burn damage that he wastes on a creature as opposed to myself is excellent for me, because it just means that my stuff lasts longer. Using Kage's effect to see the Night Moon Blossom there, and you see I have a Jupiter, a Fairer Spell, a lot of protection, and a Millennium Bond, so I've got lots of cancel to make use of. He's going to play, this is the Fire Resonator that whenever you do resonance for a Fire Magic Stone, you burn your opponent for 200 life. So this is weird for 2 reasons. 1, it's a creature, which I didn't really see much of last game. 2, this is just free burn damage for every turn that I can't really cancel because I'm not playing low rights. So 2 damage to me for hitting that Heat Ray because of the resonance trigger. And then passes the turn. Going to me. So Pete actually does something interesting here by playing this creature when he does. He kind of forces my hand to have to flip Kaguya faster than I want to, simply because I need to get access to her ability to start ramping, using my treasuries, and potentially bouncing creatures back and giving the minus to stats and doing all these kinds of pieces. So I play the Kimono, I reveal that I have a Drifting Little Moon, and then I flip. So then on Kage's Fun side, I'm going to use the effect to tap down to give it -2, and then spend my other will to use Separation of Body and Soul just to get that creature off the board. I absolutely needed it to get off the board. I can't just take 200 free damage every turn. I have to minimize damage as much as possible. So it does set me a little bit behind, but I do have my Energize counter still, which makes me feel a little bit better in case I need to use something like Fairer Spell or Scarlet's Agony if for some reason he's decided to switch to a more aggressive, taking out the burn and replacing it with Swiftness creatures. It's going to play Reunion of Master and Pupil, so it gets to look at the top 5, gets a creature and a Fire Chant. It's a nice little reloader for Fire decks, as you've seen before with the Scarlet Spellslinger. It's going to grab a Welser and a High Speed. So like I said, we're seeing some more of this like potential sideboard into more aggro, so it's a good thing that I still at least have the Scarlet's Agony to deal with something that he's potentially doing Swiftness with. And then he's going to use Blood Boil, and I say, I'm debating whether or not I want to stop that. And I say, yeah, I have to Fairer Spell that, because it's still technically, although it's kind of written in a weird way, because it's a spell chant instant, it just becomes a chant with quick cast because of the weirdness of how the change in formatting went for Force of Will. So calling for Stone, getting a Deepwood, I get to play out the, I think I play Night Moon Blossom here. I start to think about it. Yeah, I play the Night Moon Blossom just so I have a creature. It counts as a treasury, and now I have a green-blue. So with Kaguya out there, I now have access to Millennia Bonds, both their modes. Pete deciding to call Stone here, hits a Hearth's Core, pays 3, plays the Eruption to try to kill the Night Moon Blossom. I'm going to go ahead and use the Millennia Bond to draw a card, and then I get to put in a Drifting Little Moon because it's technically a treasury. So I get another free creature on his turn, which is really nice. Passing the turn. See a second Jupiter get drawn there, which is nice because eventually I'll get to a point where I can start Jupiter looping, where I can cast the Jupiter to cancel a spell, bounce the other Jupiter back to hand, and then just kind of have this continual cycle of cancels to be able to use against a deck that's primarily burns. And that makes me feel much more comfortable. Playing a Kimono here, leaving up more will, and just passing the turn. At this point, with having 4 treasuries and 3 stones, I could potentially quick cast in the Jupiter if I need to. So I'm just going to let it pass to Pete's turn at that point. Drawing for Pete's turn. He's got a World Flame summoning there, but he can't cast it quite as easily because he doesn't have access to mana counters. Gonna go ahead and cast Callous Blaze to burn me for 6 during the upkeep. Or no, I think he's, yeah. So I go down to 32, which I say that's fine. It's another heat ray. Another Eruption gets cast. Debating whether or not to use Millennia Bond or try to flash in the Jupiter. I decided to be a little bit smart and just kind of save the Millennia Bond here, potentially drawing into a treasury item. I don't, but I do draw into a Severing Winds, which is a real great backup. And it means that if he does try to cast something else, I can Severing Winds it and then use my treasuries to start drawing more cards next turn. So he just passes the turn to me. And then before draw, I think on my turn, he's gonna try to cast the Spirit of Fire. And I say that's fine. I don't really have a problem with that. So I'm going to draw, drawing into another Millennia Bond, and then drawing another card with my 3 treasuries. Calling Stone. Getting a Kage Stotosaro, so I get to peek at those top 2. This is really great, even on Kage's other side, because once I start getting to a lot of draw power, I can really start stacking it in such a way that I can just draw that card at instant speed if I need to, and still be able to quick cast it, potentially. So I play another Kimono here, just still wanting to leave up a ton of will to be able to make use of the Jupiter, the Millennia Bond, and the Severing Winds that are in my hand. Every turn that I can make Pete use up some of his burn spells without being able to successfully damage me gives me a better position, because then it just means a higher and higher hurdle for him to try to burn me with fewer and fewer cards. Meanwhile, I'm going to keep drawing card after card after card after card, and eventually just have these massive hands that I can kind of sculpt as I need to, or just stick a ton of Kimonos, which just means more draw power and more ramp. Paying 6 here to try World Flame Summoning, which would deal 10 to me and my board. Paying 2 will to use Millennia Bond here. Draw, and I knew there was a Kimono there because I had stacked it, so I get to immediately bring it into the field because I get to pick both modes. Only 1 wheel for Pete at this point. During the upkeep, he's going to try to, before the draw of my turn, he's going to try to Lightning Strike the Drifting Little Moon. I say, that's okay. I'm just going to, before you kill it, get to draw a card. And then draw a second card. Seeing if I can maybe draw into another cancel. Drifting Little Moon's going to die. And then I recover. I actually think I missed my draw for turn there. because he tried to do it before I cast my draw for the turn. So I'm actually 1 card short, but I hit another Kaguya's Sonosarda, which is great. Glistening Chick's gonna come out. At this point in time, I'm going to attach 2 of the Kimonos to Glistening Chick to make it a 9/9. My reasoning behind this is I want to, if he's gonna try to kill, I need Glistening Chick to be harder for him to kill with Keurig if he decides to flip Keurig. But I still want to leave up enough will to be able to, with treasuries, with 2, Glistening Chick, Night Moon Blossom, 2 Kimonos, and 3 stones that I can quick cast in a Jupiter if I need to. K4, especially when you're trying to go this Kimono route, is very much about will management and remembering that your treasuries become ramp. And so you really have to be careful about how many of your treasuries you're tapping, when to attach Kimonos, or when to just leave them open. I definitely do have an advantage in this matchup in the fact that he's not playing a deck that has addition removal, right? So all of my treasuries are just going to pretty much stick, which makes it much easier for me. But a lot of these K4 decks were playing 2 of the first moon for a very long time because you wanted to have both of them out, so there's this constant wave of protection for all of your treasuries. But at this deck, I don't really have to worry about that as much. First moons are still great because it's extra minus to attack, but ultimately it's not really doing a ton, especially since Pete clearly has just not been playing a lot of resonators. So minusing the attack doesn't really help me very much. Pete trying to figure out exactly what his next play is here. Plays another Spirit of Fire. So all of his fire chance, I'm going to do an extra 100 or 400 damage to me. Then uses the High Speed. I'm going to go ahead and Severing it. He does still have to spend the strength counters because he was trying to awaken it to burn me for a bunch of damage. Then he chooses to pass the turn. So I get another Kimono here. I'm going to draw another 3 cards with K4. Then I get to recover. So the beauty is now, on those Kimonos that I had bestowed to Glistening Chick are now back to being able to be used as ramp and draw. And that is kind of what I talked about before about the trade-off, is you have to be very careful about how many Kimonos to attach and when, because you give up ramp and draw potentially for a turn based on how many you give up. So on my turn, I actually just play another Kimono and another bottle, and I pass. I really don't have a reason to deal with his Spirits of Fire right now, and I'm at a point practically at this point where I can just Kimono loop, or I can just Jupiter loop him, and I'm pretty safe from any chance, therefore making the Fire Spirits just kind of generic 8/8s, which aren't going to get him much value. So he Godsword and the Wellsword during the upkeep, and then after recovery but before the draw, after recovery but before moving into main phase, I'm going to use Kaguya to tap 4 treasuries and just put Wellsword back in his hand. He's used the Goddard at this point, and if he wants to recast Wellsword, it'll cost him all 6 of his will. So in a deck that doesn't have access to ramp in the form of mana counters, having to hard cast Wellsword does not leave him very open to potential follow-up plays. And just like any Goddard, he can only use it once per game. So now point, he's just going to have to spend 6. So he tries to do Judgment on Keurig here, and I say that's fine. And he doesn't do what a lot of people have been doing with Keurig here, which is to, in response to Judgment, he taps it to go back up to 10 strength counters, burns whatever he has, and then goes back up to 15. Pete just actually decides to just let it go and gets up to 15 strength counters. He's going to burn 5 on the Glistening Chick. I think he burned 5 before he flipped, and now he's going to burn 5 more to go down to 10 to kill the Glistening Chick. In response, I'm going to try to produce some will to using Glistening Check in my stones to tap down, and then Glistening Check's effect taps down the person to quick cast in Jupiter in the modes to draw a card and bounce the Glistening Check back to my hand before Keurig successfully kills him. Glistening Check is a pretty great card, and at this point now that Keurig is flipped, I don't really have intention of killing him anytime soon, so I'll just play the Glistening Check and say, hey, if you want to use your strength counters up like he's doing right now, it just means my Glistening Check's going to survive, and I'll get to keep your stuff tapped down even longer. So he's going to burn me here for quite a bit of damage with the high speed to try to give that, it's going to be 8 damage to try to give the Spirit of Fire swiftness, and I say that's fine. He can deal the burn damage. Just gotta pay 1 more to try to do another high speed. I say sure, that's fine. Deals me another 8. He attempts to swing, and I say, well, it's a good thing I still have these Scarlet's Agonies. I'll spend 1 of my counters to produce green, and Scarlet's Agony, stop it from dealing any damage to me, and then draw a card. Going to my turn and get a Kimono. Five Kimonos down. I have Jupiter. I can start doing Jupiter loops very easily here. 2 more Kimonos in my hand, puts me to 7. And Kaguya, I think about calling for stone, but at this point in time I can also just use Kaguya to potentially block Keurig, especially since he's only down to 2 strength counters. But the idea is, do I really care about blocking Keurig when I can reduce his attack to 0, or use Scarlet's Agony to just make Keurig not be able to do any damage and keep him locked away from any strength counters to be able to awaken things like the high speed again. Playing another 2 Kimonos, going up to 7. And then at that point, just passing the turn. So at this point in time, I have 9 treasuries on the field, which means if he doesn't do anything, and I don't need to tap any of my treasuries on his turn, I can draw an extra 3 cards a turn, which means I'm drawing 4 cards on my turn, which is pretty great. Pete deciding to try to call stone here with Keurig. Go up to 8 stones. Paying blue and red, I think, for a Prokaryotic Being, which is a card you saw in the Spellslingers list. He has been using a lot of burn spells, so Prokaryotic Being is a creature that can definitely stick a lot of damage very quickly, especially leaping blue for being able to give it flying. The problem becomes the fact that I have Scarlet's Agonies and the ability to just bounce it back to his hand. Now, it is a little bit of a trade-up for him in the fact that he can... I also have Jupiters to be able to bounce stuff back to his hand. Now, the trade-up is that it doesn't really cost a lot of will for him to recast Prokaryotic Being, so potentially it's a little bit better for him. He's counting up the number of chants he has in the graveyard here to try to high speed. I'm going to respond to the high speed to bounce the Jupiter back to my hand and cancel the high speed. Unawakened, obviously. I just didn't want to take any burn damage. Paying 1 to give it swiftness. Tries to swing in with the Prokaryotic. Tap 2 of my treasuries to produce green. And use Scarlet's Agony. Now, ultimately, I could have just used my green will from my stone to do that, but I was just maybe thinking of doing something different. So I'm going to, before recovery, I choose I could draw a bunch of cards here, but I think my hand is pretty well stacked, and I didn't want to go too deep because I liked all the cards that I had in my hand here. So rather than just draw a bunch of cards, I just decided to keep my hand where it was, because I didn't want to have to discard at the end of the turn, and I didn't have enough treasuries to justify drawing that many cards, because I didn't want to have to recast, cast all of them. So playing a Drifting Little Moon, almost losing a stone there. Apologies, it seems like I might have accidentally untapped my stone, which I didn't mean to do. Yeah, so I tapped for the Drifting Little Moon. I catch myself. Doing some will counting for how many times I could potentially cast Jupiter in a single turn by using all my treasuries, before I'm debating whether or not to play any more treasuries. So I just find out that I can cast it twice, so I'll just pass the turn there. Pete's still having, he's gotten me pretty close to, to low down, and he's not entirely sure. He knows I have the Jupiter, sees the extra will. Maybe he's not really thinking about the fact that I can Jupiter loop. Chooses to hardcast in the Wellster. I say that's totally fine, man. You can totally do that. Spends 1 to try to do Memory to Memoria, which Wellster will then clone. I say in response, I'll pay in 5. Cast in Jupiter, cancel the spell, and bounce my other Jupiter back to my hand. Now, ultimately, you could also just make it so like Jupiter bounces himself, right? So I wouldn't have to. I could just keep using the same Jupiter over and over again. With the 2, it's kind of a matter of like you kind of keep maybe potentially keeping damage off one and then the other, and being able to reuse them to block over and over again. Ultimately, it's not really better one way or the other, based on, kind of what this matchup is doing. But it is something to keep in mind that Jupiter can bounce himself back to his hand. So he's going to swing in here with Keurig, attempting to hit me for 12. I'm going to use Kaguya to use 2 Kimonos to give it -4 attack, and then block with the Jupiter, which will kill the Keurig. Swinging in for 8 damage with the Spirit of Fire. Tapping enough treasuries to produce some will, and 2 of my stones to be able to flash in the Jupiter. The modes to bounce Jupiter back to my hand, attempt to draw a card, and then I'm going to block the Spirit of Fire with my Jupiter to kill it. Attempts to give his Prokaryotic Being swiftness. I'm going to Scarlet's Agony to prevent it from being able to deal damage and draw a card, although I think I missed the draw there. And then he chooses not to attack with the other Spirit of Fire, which is a little bit odd to me. I think he easily could have, without really any consequence. Hitting my last stone, Akagi is Stone of Sorrow. Getting to stack my stone deck a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and do Separation of Body and Soul. This Prokaryotic Being's printed stats is 0, so Separation of Body and Soul is an immediate kill spell for just 1, which is great. So that immediately gets that off the board. So I pay 1 here to play another Kimono. going up to a grand total of 8. Paying 2 more for a drifty glistening check, which I can use to deal with the Welser and tapping it down as much as I need to. So I do something weird here is I'm like, wait a minute, why did I tap this stone? I should go to untap it. This is because I completely forgot of the separation of body and soul. I promise that it wasn't, it was definitely unintentional that I untapped it. This is with, one thing I could say about K4 is you have a lot of sensory information to process here. So you really need to be careful about how your play lines are played out and what you're doing, and keeping track of kind of every single move you can make. Because ultimately at this point, you know, if I make use of that will in any way, shape, or form during Pete's turn, then I have done an illegal action because I cast a card using that will. And now I'm saying that no, I didn't use that stone for anything. I have it as a stone. Completely unintentional, but I think it is a good learning experience to show you that, like, especially with complex decks where you have a lot of different cards on the field and a lot of different reasons and a lot of different play lines, you really need to be tracking every single piece of information in terms of what you do when and how you do it, so that you don't make these mistakes. Because you definitely don't want to be accused of cheating, and you definitely don't want to have an unintentional tracking of a mistake not get caught by your opponent and then get caught by someone else and turn into a situation where you lose a match or you get penalized in a tournament simply because you missed a piece of information and it turns out badly for you. Plays an Ultra Dragon here, which surprisingly enough is pretty hard for my deck to deal with outside of animating Kaguya, simply because of the fact that it can't be targeted by blue, and everything I have that would try to reduce its attack or bounce it back to the hand or anything else is blue. So at this point in time, he's essentially said, well, you have to animate Kaguya to be able to stop it, which doesn't really matter to me because at this point in time, I've called all my stones, so I might as well animate Kaguya. But it is still like, if this had played earlier, it could have been potentially really bad for me. So in the same vein here, I don't know what happened over there on Pete's side, but he recovered those 3 stones. I don't really know why. He played that Ultra Dragon, but again, it ended up working out for both of our situations. Neither of us really did anything wrong, in the sense that it didn't work out in such a way that those moves have impacted the board state, which is pretty beneficial. You know, is a situation you kind of hope to have happen in situations where that mistake goes through. But because he didn't really attack or anything, I just get to draw a card and then draw a bunch more cards with all my Kimonos. Use the Drifting Little Moon to kill the Fire Spirit. And we only have to deal with Welser and the Ultra Dragon, Kaguya being able to deal with Ultra Dragon, Glistening Chick being able to deal with Welser, and my Jupiters to be able to deal with any spells that Pete might try to cast. Just pass the turn there, knowing that I could play a Kimono, but ultimately choosing not to yet. Main reason because I want to leave all the will I can open, all 10, to be able to Jupiter loop twice without having to worry about utilizing any of my Kimonos except to animate Kaguya if necessary. So once again, we're in a weird situation where it's kind of one of those like, well, again, you could just win the game this way. Kaguya has had several turns where it kind of animated her into a 15-15 and then just hit him over the face. And there's definitely been 3 opportunities to do that up until this point. Without having to worry about sticking all those Kimonos. The other thing is, again, I have a Glistening Chick, which I could just attach all of those to and then swing it and kill him. Jupiter is going to attempt to flash in to cancel the World Flame Summoning. And then there's a discussion of like, oh, Ultra Dragon's going to kill him, but no, Jupiter's still being cast, so it's not being cheated in. So Jupiter does not get killed by Ultra Dragon. Still have 5 will available to be able to cast the other Jupiter back again. In swinging with Ultra Dragon, I'm going to go ahead and animate Kaguya and block with my 15/15 flyer, which kills the Ultra Dragon. And then he should actually have to discard that card, but I think we both completely missed that that is something he has to do when Ultra Dragon dies, simply because I honestly haven't played against Ultra Dragon very much. Before he goes back into combat here, to try to kill my Kaguya with his Welser, I'm going to use Glistening Chick and the Kimono to try to draw a tap down Welser and produce some will. Gonna draw some cards. Pete's a really good sport here. He extends the hand knowing that I could just kill him this turn, you know, by attaching all those Kimonos. But I really want to try to get all 12 of them at least on the board. So he's a real good sport in being willing to continue the match here. I have 10 Kimonos. I need 2 more. But really, ultimately, at this point, there's nothing he can really do to stop me from getting all of those cards. Shayla's Adventure to draw 2 cards. See a Kimono off of it. 2 more in hand. That puts me to 11. So I need 1 more Kimono at this point to win the game. And the alternative win con. Sitting on Severing Winds, Jupiter, and a Moon. Or at a Ferris spell, I think. Pete with only having 1 card in his hand. Going back up to the 10 counters, because there's no reason not to, since he's already called all of his stone. Pays 2 for a Rune of Soul, which would get, you know, kind of cloned. So he'd get to search for 2 spells here. It's actually a pretty interesting spell for him to see at this point. And I say, you know what, I'll just use Glistening Chick and Drifting Little Moon, tap down Welser, produce green, and then Fair spell the Rune of Soul because it does quick cast. Paying 6 to cast another Welser. I say, you know what, let's go ahead and just, it's the last turn of the game, practically, I'll just use Severing Winds, and then I get to go into my turn. So I draw 1 Kimono, and I had the opportunity to be able to just draw a bunch of cards, and again, Pete's a huge friend for being willing to be able to do this. I actually kind of end this game in a very silly way. I attach 11 Kimonos to Jupiter, and then I swing in for lethal. So again, this is just highlighting the silliness that is K4's alternative win con, but it is a lot of fun. Hope you guys really enjoyed this match, and huge thanks to Pete for being willing to play against it. Deck lists for both of these lists will be up on my channel, potentially the burn list on Pete's channel, so look for that in the description. And until next time, this is DMO73, signing off.